Welcome to this week's episode of The Dental Guys. I'm John, the Dental Guy.
And I'm Wes, the Dental Guy.
And it is, if you're listening to this freshly released, it will be potentially on the heels of the Academy of Osseointegration meeting. So if you missed it, shame on you. But we will be releasing content coming up. So don't you worry. A lot of the stuff we covered at the meeting is going to be coming up. But Wes, it's been an interesting few weeks here in our area, but we got some stories to tell.
Before that, man, so thankful that the Dental Guys is brought to you by the Dental Crafters Network. And we're super excited to have the Dental Crafters Network on this year, John, as a sponsor. They've been a long-term sponsor of our podcast, and this relationship that the Dental Crafters has with us really is amazing. They are a full-service laboratory, and they do pride themselves on listening and understanding your unique needs, guiding you towards innovative solutions that make a difference. Dental Crafters Network focuses on improving a patient's quality of life with cutting-edge digital dentistry, and that's what we're talking about today is digital dentistry. So I'm super pumped to have the Dental Crafters Network as a sponsor. Visit the Dental Crafters Network at dentalcrafters.net or call 1-800-472-8302 today. And don't forget to mention the Dental Guys because, John, if you mention the Dental Guys, they're going to give you 10% off your first case. Now, we're going to talk about how the Dental Crafters Network is going to be a part of our show going forward, and I know you guys are going to love it because this episode is a hot one, John. Tell us a little bit about what we're hearing about today before we get to that episode content, right?
That's right.
John.
Well, I'll give you just a little, I want to tell you before we get to that, like you say, Wes, just a little bit about what was an event in our area. And I think many people, if you were somewhere, well, really any part of the country this last month, we've had some extreme weather events and many places saw snow, record levels, record cold, ice, flooding. I mean, so we had our own version of this snowpocalypse here in our area a couple weeks back, which would be somewhere around mid-January, depending on when you're listening to this, mid-January. And so, as what happens in our area is we don't have the equipment to clear the roads. So, you get a couple inches of snow, it pretty much shuts us down for a day easily, which is sort of, it's sort of cute, right? You're like, oh, how sweet. They can't even plow snow, so the whole town shuts down. And, I don't mind it because it's rare that we get a snow day, but occasionally we get a snow day, and it's actually kind of cool to just be able to hang with the family and all that kind of thing. So the other day, we had to shut down early because the snow and stuff was moving in. So we shut down early, I think on a Monday or Tuesday or something. And the next day, we had to make a call whether we were going to open. And so I looked at it the night before. I talked to my team and I said, hey guys, we're probably not going to be open tomorrow, but we'll keep in touch. And we already had planned the night before on at least a 2-hour delay. So that message did not get to my associate doc for whatever reason. And usually we have a whole system of, everybody's in a text thread, but somehow he didn't get on the text thread. And this guy, he grew up in snow areas. Like, he's a good snow driver, knows how to drive in the snow, not a problem. So
he got chains?
Well, I mean, yeah, I don't even think he needs the chains, but the next morning, he doesn't know we're not open, and he's got about a 30-minute drive or so in. So he doesn't know, and we're going to make the call on whether we open, not until probably like 9, until we kind of see what the weather's like. Well, he comes rolling into town, and he's doing pretty well. But again, we don't have equipment to clean off the road. So it's icy, it's snowy. He gets to about 50 yards from the office, hits ice.
Oh, no.
His car slides. And, for those of you who've had this happen, anybody that's lived in snow has had this happen. You know the feeling when your car is sliding and you cannot stop it, but it's going slow. So it is the worst feeling. You're going slow. you have lost control of
The
your car.
passenger's always saying like, turn away, turn away.
Yeah.
Like they're yelling like, turn it, turn it. You're like, I'm turning it.
Stop it, turn it.
Turn
Hit the
it. Right, right, heavy,
Yeah,
right.
exactly. Left Titans over.
Titans.
Yeah. Yeah, we
Colin
both
McRae.
obviously
Colin
have played Colin McRae. So we get he slow motion slams into the curb. And
Oh no.
you hit the curb going 3 miles an hour, and and literally it's outside the office parking lot. Like it is like 10 feet from the office parking
This
lot.
is classic
And
John story, guys.
of course, right? Everything like this happens. So he's now like, well, okay. He sees no one's in the parking lot. So he kind of limps into the parking lot and he's like, where is everybody? Calls a practice manager who tells him the unfortunate
The apocalypse has really happened.
Yeah, exactly. Either we're all dead.
Right.
Yeah. So she says, hey, we're not in the office. In fact, we had just talked like 10 minutes before, she and I, that we were going to text the team and say we're not in the office. But of course, he's not on the thread. So he goes, okay, well, I don't know if my car is drivable. And she's like, what? So she's calling me. So long story short, tie rod end on his suspension gets completely destroyed. So he can't drive the car. So now he's stuck 30 minutes from home in the Snowmageddon, inoperable. So again, long story short, finally we get him home with some help from my practice manager. And, I was like, dude, this is not your fault. This is clearly a breakdown in the systems of our office. So once we got everything fixed up, I happily paid for his repair, because that was not his fault. And of course, he was so nice. He's like, it's fine. It's no big deal. It's just things happen. He's just more angry that he hit the curb than anything. But I was just, if you live in this part of the country where we get just a little snow, it's crazy how dangerous it actually is, because no matter what car you have, if you hit ice, man, you're going down. And I know you guys had a ton of snow. I saw pictures of you shoveling your office parking lot with 8 or 10 inches of snow, which for us is like insanity.
Yeah, the South got shut down real hard here in Knoxville, Tennessee, in the Valley, and wow, it's great. Here's what's great: as a practice owner, John and I, we take a couple week and a half off for Christmas. You're back to work, week and a half. What's another week? Right? What's another week, right? On your P&L. Who cares?
That's right.
Your associate's like, oh, what am I going to do? I mean, it's like.
I know. It's so stressful for
It's
people, depending on where you're at in your career. A week out can be a big deal. And it's hard, but you can't do a thing about it sometimes, because even if you show up, even if you are heroic, patients are not coming anyway. But it is stressful because, you're just coming off the holidays. You already have had a couple weeks off, and now, you're essentially looking at almost a month off, which, is hard for a lot of folks. Anyway,
well, you go through that week and you have, we were off for a complete week here. I know you're a little bit further east of me, and you had a little more different weather pattern, but as I bring patients back in, even today, we're trying to do as much as we can to catch up. I mean, when you move that many patients, it's ridiculous. So, on top of already being solid. So, patients are saying, I didn't get out for 8 days. That was the average answer today, was 8 days they were stuck. Because nobody could.
In addition, I had 2 days, which we're going to touch on this toward the end of the show. I had 2 days that week that I had reserved for my lab technician, their whole team, and about 8 patients that we were doing photogrammetry, full arch photogrammetry cases that we were documenting and, getting all this workflow figured out. That was
Did the surgeon really go and pick up those patients, John?
So there was a rumor that he was going to go pick up the patients. I don't think he had to. I think everybody made it. But, I mean, there was legit, 8 or 10 inches of snow there.
Yeah, my patient was coming down there for something in particular, and they never could make it. So,
Yeah. Yeah. That was
hey,
crazy.
this too brought back memories being off that much time whenever you're supposed to be working, of quarantining and all the stuff that we dealt with back in
COVID.
2020. Oh my gosh. Even my girls were like, this is not happening. We're
Yeah.
tired. We're ready to go back to school. I think, you know, it's, it's a fun thing when it happens here, but it doesn't last. It shouldn't last that long here because
No, no.
this place gets shut down.
Well, I
Talking
think that,
speaking about 2020, right?
yes,
Here's the segue, John.
love it.
Speaking about 2020, what was going on before 2020 in the world of digital scanning? Scanning for just normal crown and bridge. Today, John and I want to talk a little bit about scanning, where it came from. Before 2020, where would we at? Where would the dental guys at when it comes to like choosing a a scanner just for crown and bridge? What would we say today is our decision tree of what we're using it for? How are we using scanners? But what would you buy right now? And John has an interesting conundrum because he's in the market for possibly another scanner in addition to the one he already owns. Also, we've got a special segment coming up in this episode on some of the high-tech scanning that we see a lot on the Insta right now, photogrammetry. And what does that mean? What is that? If you're listening to this as a dental student, you're thinking, man, what about scanning? Because we're having to learn about impressioning and all those things. It's interesting because before COVID, John, before 2020, the adoption rate of crown and bridge scanning, just crown and bridge, right? Intraoral scanning was less than 20%. And there was a lot of speculation of when is this ever going to really take off? Because it is something that is being taught in some schools. I don't know how many now are teaching scanning. But before 2020, it just seemed to kind of creep between 10 and 15%, and then eventually it kind of creeped up to around 18%. Brad, the dental lab guy, told us about his lab, and before COVID in 2019, he was seeing at about 1 in 5 crowns that were digitally scanned. So he was at about 20%. He, in some ways, I think he was creeping up to 25 to 30% because he pushes for digital, because he does digital design. Now, John, okay,
Yep.
circle back to us in 2024. What's the adoption rate? According to Brad, the dental lab guy, in his lab alone, he is pushing 60% of his ingest of crown and bridge is digitally scanned with some type
That's
of
crazy,
scanner.
right?
It's
It's crazy.
incredible. It's an
The
incredible
growth
growth.
over a
And
very short period of time.
why has this happened? What should we be looking for in digital scanning? Really, it comes down to some questions, John, we should just be asking ourselves. Just general questions that the dental guys have already answered for you in the past. John, tell us a little bit about how we should evaluate what are we using scanning for?
Yeah. And I think that the, turning point with this was in some ways cost. And cost, when you started to see scanners that could do a lot of the things that a scanner that cost, $40,000 or $50,000 used to be, that was now, below $20,000. When we saw color scanning and we saw, speed, and we saw these things in small form factor, no powder, and now we were down in a lower cost entry point. That was one obviously big change that happened. And then I think too, we just started to see the advantages. I think enough people saw the advantages of what we could do only with scanning, that it really changed the world. And the labs drove a lot of it too. We saw some labs that started saying, hey, we'll give you a scanner in exchange for you giving us a certain amount of work, because the lab knows they can be more profitable, but potentially more profitable with a scanner. The workflow may be a little bit more accurate. There's some things that get better. But I think some of the things we need to be thinking about for those of you listening, if you're in practice or if you're about to get out into practice, are, what can scanning do for you versus impressioning? First of all, I think we can say that for the majority of things, you can absolutely still get great results with impressions. There are excellent impression materials proven, and for so many things, you can get great results with impressioning. So why should we be scanning? And I think, Wes and I've covered in previous episodes some of the things that only scanners can do. Things like being able to get accurate records of a patient while they're in orthodontics, for instance. Things like being able to maybe get a little bit more accurate occlusal scan data based on compared to a bite registration material that has some type of inaccuracy just due to movement or give. Things like being able to take a design that you have created for something and be able to more accurately replicate it. Things like being able to retrofit crowns to existing partials by scanning the crown prior to removing the old crown. So there are things that we know only we can do with scanning, really. And I think that is one thing we need to be thinking about. And just overall, the way that it makes us better dentists. Wes, talk a little bit about how scanning over the many years that you've been doing it now has made you a better dentist.
First scan was a 2D scan in 2001 with one of the original CEREC machines in rural West Virginia. And I got to help even mill a inlay, onlay, and a 3-unit. At the time, I'm pretty sure it was like some type of lithium disilicate bridge, and incredible, right? And in 2009, I started scanning. So what did it do for me, and what is it doing for me now? How does it make me a better dentist? Well, the first thing it makes you a better dentist on is if you don't have high magnification loops or microscopes, you're going to see your margins, and you're going to see your tissue, and you're going to see if tissue's covering the margin.
That's right.
And it's pretty obvious. And when you can see the fibers from your cord, and you can see the ablation marks from your laser and ablated tissue that's kind of laying up that you didn't brush away. Even on the TrueDef, one of the things that it had the advantage of is it had a true picture. As even though it was black and white, you could see your margin and how crisp it was, or not crisp. And
that's a double-edged sword, right?
Oh,
because the more that we've realized we can see of our preps, the better it makes us. Also, sometimes the more, frustrating it is a little bit because you're like, oh, that's not as good as I would have liked it to be, And the other thing that I think you hit on without saying it is your tissue management has to get a lot better when you're talking about scanning.
What did you buy, John? What did you buy whenever you started scanning?
Yeah, so we had the discussion, and Wes told me, he's like, if you start scanning, you're going to need either laser or electrosurge, end of story. And he made that for the posterior special.
And let's explain why. And even today, I still believe this, okay? And my associate, who just started scanning whenever he joined my practice this past year, had been doing impressioning for solid 2 years plus dental school. He was doing 2-chord technique, okay? And I'll give him that, because and like anybody that's doing 2-chord technique, there's nothing wrong with that technique, okay?
No,
that's what John and I recommend for 100% of your cases. But here's where 2-chord technique will not work with scanning, okay? I don't think it will. It's in the posterior, down around number 15, number 2, on your big giant MODs, or number 3 and 14, or wherever you're way sub G. See, the reason why John and Wes have always loved Improgum, right, is because it has the highest shark fin test. It means it will flow under pressure, and it will push tissue out of the way, and it will move hydraulically through and into around your first cord that you packed after you pull your top cord. Here's where scanners can't see. They can't see to move tissue. They can't see through tissue. They can't see through water. No matter what CEREC machine you're on, iTero, Medit, none of those machines can see through liquid. Blood, nothing. So why I tell John And it is, I said, when you go to scanning, you have to get an electrosurge or some type of diode laser, because you're going to have to get stuff out of the way. You can't just rely on cord anymore.
Yeah, and it's 100% true. I
I'm
mean, I
passionate
would
about it, aren't I,
say,
John?
yeah, well, you are, but for good reason, because I think that, that's the reality. And that's what labs want their doctors to hear too, because a lot of times we just go, oh, well, you'll get the scanner and your people know
John,
that the preps have to.
hold on just a minute. It's
Yeah.
2024. It's time for a dental guy's old school rant, right?
Oh,
Yeah. The ADA came out and said years ago in a paper that, and thousands of impressions across multi-center trials, the number one problem, right? And like, I don't know, it was like upper 70% of all these things that they saw at the lab, they had problems, and most of them were critical errors. That means the garbage you guys are sending, I'm going to call it out, us, dentists, are sending. You guys, us, right? The garbage that dentists are sending to the lab is because we don't know how to control tissue, right? We're using crap like, here's what Brad, the dental lab guy, said. He said the worst thing that they ever created was Expacil. The worst thing. And why did he say that? Because we're relying on some kind of clay material to push away and I'm not saying it doesn't do a good job drying, because I've used Expacil, right? But what it comes down to is tissue management. And we've got to do a better job. I don't care what kind of scanner John and I talk about here in the next 15, 20 minutes. If you don't do a good job with your tissue management, you're going to have problems. And that's a 2024
you cannot get
rant
away
from West the Dental Guy.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think Brad has said, and other lab technicians I've talked to, they're like, that's the thing about scan. Like, everybody now is like, oh, I want to scan. A lot of people are saying, I want to scan. But then he's having to troubleshoot.
He's having more problems. He's having more problems now.
Yeah, because if you put Improgum in the hands, or there's other good impression materials, but just one example, you put Improgum in the hands of somebody who is an okay prepper, but at least you're going to see the margins. Even if there is not perfect tissue management, often you can get away with it. But you cannot get away with anything with scanning. You cannot get away with anything. And his lab is having to have people, and it's harder too, to quote, fake it. You remember the idea of when you were trimming dies back in school, if you had a spot that you were like, not
interpolation.
Really sure what
Interpolation's a better word, John, better than fake.
Yeah, exactly. That sounds so professional.
The cleoid discoid carver technique.
That's right. Exactly. You just go, I'm just going to carve my margin in right where I think it is, or I'm going to add a little bit of die-cal and I'm going to make a little margin, and that was, but you could do it. And you know what? I obviously that's not what we want to do, but there were many times you could get away with it. But in scanning, when you start to see how the design is actually done, if you talk to the technicians that are marking your margins, you're going to see that it's not very easy, if at all possible, to connect dots when you don't have data, if there's a big black hole. So I think that what we got to take from this is, no matter what you do, no matter what system you use, there's no system that's going to help you manage tissue just because you get some brand of scanner. But let's talk about that exact question is, okay, so what should you be looking at in a scanner these days, because people want to know, okay, so what should I buy, right? What should I buy? And I think there's a lot of them on the market, and I think the market has become maybe not saturated, but there are lots of new scanners.
It's confusing.
It can be. Yeah. So I think it's helpful, Wes, to talk a little bit about kind of our two journeys, as we both were using the old True Definition scanner before it became obsolete, rest in peace. And when it became obsolete, and
that was a sad day,
it's the saddest day. And when it became obsolete, we were like, okay, we got to do something. And we were kind of at different points in our practice life, our timeline, what we were focused on. And so we went different directions in what we bought for different reasons. And so, Wes, talk a little bit about what kind of your journey was with that. What did you get? Why did you get it? Some of the things that you maybe like and don't like about your scanner. I'll talk the same about mine, and then maybe we can talk about a couple of other brands out there.
Well, what I would say is that all I did was I called my laboratory, who I was using, and I said, hey, the next time I'm in the lab, I want to look at people's scans as you guys are ingesting them, or do a Zoom call and do a screen share. And I want to see what the scans look like as they're coming in from all the brands of the scanners. And then I want to talk to the person that's actually marking margins and asking about the software that they're using to mark margins or look at my margins. And I want to see how the workflow is. So one, I called the lab and I said, I want to know what's working and what's not. And Brad at the time, and which he has a different answer now, and we'll bring him on the show. We'll talk a little more about that, to talk about his favorites and what he thinks about scanning right now. But we'll tell you what, back in 2021, I bought an Itero because the support, number one. Number two, I do quite a bit of ortho in my office. I do straight wire ortho. I do clear aligner therapy. I do a lot of expansion. And so from a standpoint of a demonstration piece and from a standpoint of simulation, even if you're not doing on-the-fly simulation, meaning, hey, I'm going to scan you and in 2 minutes it'll show your teeth straight that fast. It's incredible, right? It's a sales tool. So I bought an Itero because it was, one, not only a way for me to create awareness for what teeth should look like when they're straight, but number two, it was a tool to use for many other things like crown and bridge. It was certified for if I wanted to use Invisalign, right? It's the only scanner that you can right now send and get aligners. Otherwise, you have to take an impression. And
Right.
so, and it's gotten even better, right? So one thing I would say is that the support that we've received from the Itero, the onboarding process was really good. The support we've had, if we've had maybe a little issue, I will say in the past, say 18 months, when we do call Itero, there are a line and their customer service line. The people on the other end of the line they're just sometimes they're not as knowledgeable as I want them to be. Now we rarely have issues, okay? And so my pros for having the Itero is this. Number one, it's been very reliable, okay? You turn it on, it works, right? It has a very systemized way of approaching crown and bridge. It has a systemized way of approaching implant scanning. It has and we're talking about single units. It has a systemized way to approach for anything orthodontic, simulation, and they're doing more with it, okay? They are adding more to it. I feel like the speed has been there. The comfort for the patient has been there. I've not had a problem adapting to the scan path. So these are all pros, okay? What are the cons? I came from a smaller wand, so I do think the wand on the Itero is large, right? So I think that's a con. That's not going anywhere because every wand's big at this point, because they're putting all the technology back into the wand and not into the computer. I think the other con I would say is the cost. It is one of the most expensive scanners on the market that doesn't have a milling machine attached to it. I think that the support has dropped down just a touch, right? It's not as good as it once was support-wise from a standpoint of a phone call away and we've got your solution for you. Sometimes I think I would want to do something fancy, and we'll talk about fancy here in just a second. And it limits me because it doesn't understand fancy. And when I say fancy, it doesn't understand anything that it hasn't been taught. It hasn't been taught how to do next level implant things. And even when you're trying to do single unit implant crowns and scan tissue formers outside the mouth, it really struggles with that. I can do it, but I can do it, right? And my lead assistant, who is really a better scanner intraorally than I am at this point, she struggles scanning outside the mouth when they were talking about scanning custom tissue formers and temporary crowns. So those are my cons. And John, what are you using?
Yeah. So
What's your pros and cons?
I jumped into the Medit scanner back in 21 and I guess beginning of 22. And my thought process, based on the way my practice was wired at the time, was much more based upon crown and bridge, more quote, daily dentistry with crown and bridge and dental implants. That was kind of my what I was looking for in the scanner. I had at the time, people that were experienced scanners in the office, assistants and docs that knew how to scan. So I didn't need as much support, and I knew that I was not going to get potentially as much support, although I was pleasantly surprised with the training that we did get. It was what we needed. It wasn't in person, which at the time I didn't feel like we needed, but there was some good online training. And so I went the Medit direction because of what I saw after demoing it. And I demoed several scanners, and I liked the idea of how the software interface was. I liked the fact that it looked like they were constantly updating and upgrading, and were responsive to what people were asking for. And I will say, it's been an excellent scanner for us. It's also relatively low cost. And I liked that idea. I liked the fact that I could get a scanner for, $16,000, $17,000 that had color. It was a relatively small wand compared to some, and it was fast, and it seemed to be pretty reliable from the demos I did. And it has proven to be all of those things. It's fast. It's been completely reliable. We had one cord issue where we had to get a new cord after just using it for a while, and that was easy, and it was a warranty item, so it was free, and it was overnight shipping. So I mean, that was the only issue we've had as far as parts and pieces. I like the fact that the tips were autoclavable multiple times, so we didn't have to spend quite as much as some on the disposables. And I have really been happy with its performance. It's done everything I've asked it to do. It scans impressions if you want. It knows how to do that. I've had pretty good success scanning outside the mouth because it actually has a protocol for that. If you're scanning a provisional, there's a place for that, and the implant scanning is all, done pretty well. And it also has, if you want to get into printing in your office, it has a splint design module that, for instance, that's part of it. So if you want to kind of integrate it with printers, it's kind of geared toward it because it's a third party as compared to a a CEREC type of closed system. It's kind of they've embraced the idea of interoperability. It has decent AI that can filter out stuff I don't want to see, like a certain color of glove that it will not show up in the scan.
Tongues, cheeks, things like that.
Yeah, things like that. And now the thing that I don't like about it, the one thing I don't like about it is I can't scan for Invisalign. And you might think, okay, well, how big of a deal really is that? Well, okay, I will say it this way. You don't have to scan for Invisalign, but darn it, is it nice. And the simulation that Wes is getting from iTero to be able to show the patient is a tremendous marketing tool. And I don't want to understate that because I do think that it probably sells a whole lot of Invisalign in your practice. And I do Invisalign, but I can tell you that for sure, for me to be able to give a patient an idea of what we could do is much harder, much more labor intensive, and my scanner is not a part of the conversation. And then going back and rescanning patients for refinements and things like that is so nice to be able to do versus do you take all the attachments off, you take new impressions. Anyway, so that's what I've kind of come to is I have this love-hate relationship with Invisalign because of it, because I think it's so frustrating that they don't just allow for everyone to be able to submit, even if they can't do the simulations. It'd be just, to me, a no-brainer for that company. I know they want to sell scanners, but gosh, just being able to submit cases like I used to be able to do with True Definition. Now the fact you can't do that, and I know they can do it because we did it with TrueDef, right? So it's a limitation of them wanting to sell scanners, and it kind of gets me. it's one of the things almost that makes me not want to buy one, because I'm that guy. I'm like, oh yeah, you want to limit what I can do. It makes me not want to buy the product, but it is very good at what it does. And so it's got us thinking. Now my associate doc is doing Invisalign and he's getting into that and he's very comfortable scanning. And so you reach a point where you're like, what's the trigger point where we're doing enough cases that it starts to make sense? Or should we look at it a different way and say, if we're not doing as many cases, how many more cases would we do after we had that in our practice? So, Wes, give us your we'll talk about other scanners for a bit too, but what's your just bottom line? Is that scanner responsible for selling Invisalign in your practice?
So every time that we say, okay, today is an opportunity for us to put this into one of the hygiene ops and just scan every patient in hygiene, just in one of the ops, we end up selling a case every time. And it's because of the simulator. I know a good friend of mine, shout out to Jonathan if he's listening to this, and he has 2 iTeros, and he bought 2 just because of what I just told you. What it does is it's a selling tool, which was one of the top things that I said at the very beginning of my analysis of the iTero.
Yep.
It is impressive. It's fast. It is built for clear aligner therapy. That's what the machine is made for. Now, I'm not saying it won't do the other things because I'm doing those other things, but the most frustrating things are the other things that it doesn't do, but that's always the case because we always want these toys to do more.
Of course.
But what this machine was built for, if you're interested in clear aligner therapy through Invisalign and you want a sales tool, this is it. Because I'm not aware of a workflow as easy and as well polished right now that you can just implement really fast. There may be something out there, and text me, right? So text the dental guys, right, at 865-544-8954. What are you using, and is there a workflow, and how are you using it? Are you putting it in your operatories?
Right.
Or are you putting it in your hygiene rooms, right? It's all about awareness, and that's what they teach at Spear Education. We're excited about Spear, and they're collaborating with us. Make sure you mention the dental guys when you go out to Spear, right? Most likely this year, right? The dental guys will be at Summit, right? And we're excited about that. But mention the dental guys when you're signing up for courses, and I know they'll give you guys a discount. That's a side story, right?
Yeah.
So, but coming back,
I think that's a great point you brought up, Wes. It's a selling tool like maybe no other when it comes to getting patients to say yes to Invisalign, because it gives them a visual. It gives them something they can actually see, and they can actually show their family member or their mom or whatever it is. And I think that then the question becomes, okay, so we know this is sort of the 2, I would say, major camps in scanners and decision making. It's you either go with one of the bigger companies like iTero, and you have some capabilities that you get for that price point,
right,
that you don't get from a Medit. But let's talk about kind of where I think the market has gone. CEREC is still CERECing the way that they always have, and really nothing has changed there that I can tell.
And at one time, and I honestly, John and I looked at the Prime Scan, and for the scanner technology, it is probably one of the best all-around scanners. But it does lock you into an ecosystem of Sirona. They have unlocked it to where you can now send outside of their system. You just don't get all the fancies. They are paired up with their own aligner company. And so you've got to be okay with that. Are you going to go with the number 1 aligner company? I mean, for goodness sakes, guys, Invisalign sponsors the NFL. Okay? So this is a big
you got to respect them as a company. They're a monster.
They're a monster.
And I think that, nobody's doing it as well, in my opinion, as they are. And I have looked at other companies and tried a couple other companies. So I think that CEREC is doing their thing, and they're doing it well. It's not that it's bad. It's just like, as we've talked about in previous episodes,
it really
CEREC
comes down.
Can be excellent.
It really comes down to what kind of practice you are and where you're going.
What
If
are
you're
you wanting to
just
do? And if you're
if you're just crown and bridge and an occasional night guard, all these are going to work. And I would not invest the money into Prime Scan or some of the more expensive scanners like the Itero. We're talking $40,000 to $50,000 plus here. You're not going to want to invest that just for scanning crown and bridge. You're going to want to get what John has, or one of your laboratories may even offer it, another scanner. There's other scanners out there, like 3Shape. You can buy a 3Shape scanner that's a lot less,
right,
more
you can get the
capable.
Trios 3 basic
It's
for
amazing.
close to the same cost as we're talking about for
Right.
Medit. You can get a really crazy Trios that's $30-some thousand with all kinds of bells and whistles, which I will just say from an editorial standpoint, everyone I've talked to that's bought the Trios 4 with all the bells and whistles doesn't use the bells and whistles. I've
No,
yet
they
to
don't,
meet one
because it's
person.
software niceties that don't play a role in your day-to-day operation. It's for research.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the Trios, to me, it works best with, is people that are over here geeking out like Mark Ludlow, that's geeking out trying to figure out like workflows and things, and like tracking, like these are things that haven't even been implemented yet. If you want to just get into scanning, you need to spend less than $20,000. That's the dental guy's recommendation. If you're just doing crown and bridge and occasional night guards and maybe some kind of
That's right.
off-brand clear
And
aligner therapy.
there's probably 5 or 6 scanners that you could choose from that are going to be in there. Medit's one of them, Shining is one of them, the low cost Trios is one of them, Condor is one of them. I mean, there's Dental Wings has one.
Condor, man, I forgot about that thing. I tried it out at IDS years ago. Can't believe it made it. It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, there's just like all kinds of these, and they're coming out all the time too. And so I think CRA, old Gordon Christensen's group, did a quick little synopsis a couple months back about what they recommend, and it kind of came to the same conclusion. They're like, you can get an excellent scanning from a lower cost scanner if what you're looking to do is what we're just talking about, which is basic crown and bridge.
John, I got to ask it. Are you still taking impressions?
Well, I am, for certain things. And the biggest thing, and we could spend a whole show on this, which we don't have time for, but removable, in my opinion, is still, we are in a world of needing we cannot scan movable tissue. So the idea of completely digital dentures is not feasible in reality. There are ways we can maybe cut out some steps. Maybe we can make, some of our things more streamlined with some types of you can definitely scan an impression,
You're not getting rid of border molding.
That's right. You still have to be able to border mold. So I think from a removable standpoint, I'm still there. And when we're talking about up until just recently, it was full arch implant dentistry. That was where the only way to get accuracy that was even close was with impression material. And I still believe, and here's where I will say, this is one thing you might be something, I think we agree on this, but I still believe that we are limited by the detail on printed models in the anterior. I think that when we are taking veneer impressions or high, like you're trying to match
We haven't talked.
You're trying to match 8 to 9 or 9 to 10 with from a texture standpoint. You just don't get the detail for the lab technician to see what you need them to do on number 8 from a scan. Not because of the scan is awesome, but it is the printed model. If you put it up to a stone model made with high quality stone, you're going to see more detail. You're going to see how the light reflection needs to work. The lab's going to see texture. I just don't think we're there with our printed models. Wes, what do you think about that?
It's funny that's why I brought it up, because I wanted to hear where you're at on these topics. Removable partials, right? Especially, free-ended distal extensions. You've got to have border molding on these situations. Anything that's tooth-borne, maybe I'd consider scanning it. But I'm an Accudent guy, and even I'm not moving into the digital dentistry realm. I'm moving into the digital planning realm as smaller smile design. We'll talk a little bit about that here in just a second. But I'm not. My denture impressions are border molded and processed base plates, all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to veneers, I'm impressing. And I'll tell you right now, see, here's the thing about milling veneers, and we can't get into the high weeds here. Most veneers, unless they're pressed, have to be finished on the model. And the model accuracy at the margin, a lot of times, my margins sometimes, John, are approaching 0.2 millimeters thick, especially in some areas, right? And I'm concerned that the detail, I'm losing it in the printed model. You might say, well, you're not printing at the highest resolution. Let me just tell you right now, because the models that we're getting that are high-res models from our lab, I really believe, because I know the printers they're printing them on, they're incredibly accurate.
Yep.
And I'm not saying that we couldn't, but I've done some A/B testing, and I've looked at it over the last couple of years, and I'm just not comfortable sending scans and getting printed models back with my veneers on them. And
Yeah,
so,
so I'm kind of in this same world. I'm doing, in the anterior, I'm doing 2-core technique and impressions, just like
John,
I always have.
It's crazy. We're doing the same things we were doing 20 years ago because it's just not there. The scanner can see it, but the printer can't print it. And there's still an analog part to this thing, right?
And that's so that's
finishing.
that's where, we're hoping to have Greg Kinzer on later on this year to talk about, is there still a place for pressing? We can't get on the high weeds like you say, but does that mean that there's still a place for pressing? So
some of you might want to know what pressing is. Well, you're just going to stay tuned.
That's right.
What the heck is pressing?
So what's really been, I feel like the theme for this season is this, it keeps coming up, what's been messing with us. But what's been kind of messing with us when it comes to this world, I mentioned that until recently, full arch implant dentistry was one of the things that I was taking impressions for every single time. And if you listen back a couple years back, Mark Ludlow was on the show talking about trying to perfect a full arch, fully digital workflow using, at that time, Prime Scan. What we are struggling with, what we've always struggled with, is scanners are really good at seeing topography on teeth, but there's stitching that goes on between individual pictures, if you will, that scanner takes, and it introduces inaccuracy the further you go across the arch, and even more inaccuracy when there's not a lot of topography to scan, like in edentulous areas. So we were struggling with this idea, will we ever do away with the verification jig? And now a new technology has emerged, not just emerged, but has been really validated, called photogrammetry. So if you're sitting in dental school, like Wes said, and you're like, photo what? You're going to have to do a geek's corner, and you're going to have to dive into some data and some research, and you're going to need to look and see what photogrammetry really is. But I think what you're going to find is that it is the way of the future. And the idea is that we're going to take a special type of camera that's going to be able to take an image of all of our implant positions at the same time. Wes, you still there? I'm not sure if I lost you.
Oh, I'm here. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Just making sure. So if we think about how this technology works, what we're doing, and I'll put a couple pictures up if you are watching the YouTube right now. We'll see if we can maybe edit some pictures, and if not, at very least on the show description, we can put some links to some photos of these cases. But we're essentially taking our implants, we're putting our multi-unit abutments on them, and then we're putting a small little, I call kind of a QR code for implants, almost a little flag that's like a QR code. And a specialized type of camera that has multiple lenses is able to take a photo, if you will, of all of the positions. It acquires the signal of all these little QR code looking things, and it is able through that to be able to see depth, angle, all of those things, but more importantly, relative positions between implants. So it can look at all 5 implants and it can say, okay, here is where all of those are in 3-dimensional space with extreme accuracy. And then you can take that data, merge it back together with tissue scanning, with facial scanning, with the post-surgical tissue after it's closed, and pre-surgically with the vertical dimension of the patient, the pre-surgical provisional or design that you've created. and we can create a fully digital workflow. Now, you kind of hear all this, and if you've not looked into this, you're probably thinking, oh, come on. This is not possible. This is not reality. It sounds like it's not possible. Well, I mentioned a few weeks ago that this is something that we did several cases, and we're gonna have a whole episode on this with Brad, the dental lab guy, where we can talk about what we actually did and what happened. But I just suffice to say, we did 6 cases, ranging from it's pretty straightforward with implants that were already placed and healed and a patient in a provisional already, and we were just making a new one, all the way up to a dual arch with zygomatic implant, a nasalis implant, tons of bone loss, vertical that had to be altered pre-op, and then did photogrammetry. And every single one of these prosthetics literally screwed in like butter. It was truly unbelievable. Truly unbelievable. Minimal adjustments, really no adjustment to speak of.
From what I hear,
it's there. It's here.
Is we're starting to eliminate components because of this.
Yes.
Brad was explaining to me that no longer relying on cylinders, right? Mm-hmm. We're able to mill directly to abutments because we have the abutment accuracy to be able to create a prosthetic that goes direct to the abutments. I asked him some hard questions. I can't wait to have Brad on the show to discuss some of these things. Photogrammetry in the literature has really proven itself to have cross-arch accuracy like that of our top impression materials, and being verified afterwards as correct. And we know that a lot of you aren't doing full arch, but photogrammetry has other uses. When we talk about full arch, you might not be doing full arch implant prosthetics like John described, but photogrammetry can be used for other things. The scanner itself is a fancy camera that is outside the mouth, and it does a lot of the work outside the mouth. So what we're able to do is overlay teeth like virtual wax-ups. We're able to show articulation, overlay that with an actual three-dimensional image of the patient's face, and rotate around quarter smile, half smile, show high smile, low smile, smile in repose. All the things that we've been trying to do with just 2D imaging, now we get it in three-dimensional workspaces, overlaying different sizes of teeth, all that. Yep. For years,
and I'll say this too, as like, I think right now the way that I'll describe photogrammetry is it is an arms race. All of these companies are trying to develop these workflows that are basically, they've got all the parts and pieces. You could buy a package with the photogrammetry scanner, a facial scanner, intraoral scanner, 3D printer, and be able to actually do all of this in kind of a one-stop shop. The labs are a huge player in this potentially, because again, just kind of like we've talked about, in-office milling, you have to really change your whole practice if you're going to do this all in-house, because there still has to be a designer involved, and probably that will be the lab, unless you're, somebody who just loves doing that all day. But I think that now all these companies are like, okay, if we can get this perfected of this workflow. And I'll tell you, just a couple weeks ago, we learned a lot about things that, even though that we had all the technology and it all worked as it should, there were certain things that we were like, okay, so there's a little bit here, a little bit of a trick to this part. There's a little bit of a trick to that part. But imagine too, and this is the craziest maybe part of this whole thing, and this is full arch. I realize we're talking about that, but that's what everybody's kind of developing the most. But so the day of surgery or 24 hours later, if you could create a custom designed, completely accurate, passively fitting provisional with no cylinders that bolts right onto implants, okay, that is amazing. Okay, but honestly, it's not the most amazing part. So follow me here. Let's say you do that. Think of all the data or information you now have. You have vertical, you have a design, you have occlusion, you have implant position. Only thing that's going to change is if the patient wants to change the design. Okay, that's possible. Or you're going to have tissue changes, right? So over your implant healing, your tissue healing, you're going to have tissue changes. Well, think of the 8 appointments, Wes, that we had to do once that patient is healed. We had to do impressions, verification, wax rim, aesthetic try-in, printed, blah, 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 probably 7, 8 appointments. Now, all you do is unscrew the provisional, you take a scan of the healed tissue, and you put the provisional back on, and you go to final. All of those appointments go away. And that when I really understood that, I was blown away by that, because it's not just about the 24-hour provisional custom designed, although that's amazing, but it's really the elimination of maybe the entire, this could be such a game changer restoratively.
Why are these cases so expensive in mine in your office? Because we follow a written protocol of proven success. I've been restoring hybrids since residency, and because I'm following written protocols of proven success and not out here like skating on ice, like John was talking about his associate doing earlier on the podcast, with his car. Because we're following protocols, we're having proven things happen to our patients. Things are lasting a long time. And what we're going to say to this is one of those dental guys things where we said back in the original podcasting, beginning of our podcast, is the time now has come, because this has been around for 5 years plus, because it's been in the automotive industry for a while, and now they're bringing it into a smaller scale. And the time has now come for us to actually turn and look at this technology and seriously consider implementing it into our practice on a full-time basis. And because we are utilizing certain techniques that we could actually decrease cost and overhead expense, which possibly could be more profitable, or we could pass that cost along to the patient, cost savings along to the patient, and lower the cost of an overall procedure, and maybe get patients, John, to accept treatment because we do lower cost and we're offering things that maybe don't cost as much more because we're decreasing our labor. I think this is amazing.
And when Brad comes on, we look forward to that conversation, giving you a little bit more detail on what's possible and what's coming and what does this really look like. How will this be implemented, which is a big discussion of implementation.
Yeah.
And I'm excited about it, Wes. I think this is going to be for sure a big part of our practices, all of our practices. I really will say that. I think all of our practices in the next, 5 years will be impacted by that technology. So as we kind of come to this point now, Wes, where as you started, scanners have now become the norm, and as we have one wave of adoption, now we see another wave starting with the new technology. And how will that look and how will that affect our practice? There's always something coming. And that's really why you tune into Dental Guys, right? You tune into Dental Guys because you want to know, first of all, what should I be doing now? What should I be doing now? Which we've talked a lot about. But then also, what's going to take us to the next level in the coming years? And that's really what you're here for. So we hope today's episode has given you a lot to think about. We hope that you have been challenged. We hope that you are going to do that Geeks Corner. And we hope that you're going to be ready for what is coming as we continue this year with some releases that you're just not going to believe. It's going to be a great year. So thanks for listening. Check us out. Like, share, subscribe. Check us out on all the socials. For Wes, I'm John, and we are the Dental Guys.